We're at the top of the hour. So far, I only see Carsten and Marco. Let's wait a few more minutes for people to show up.
I know Ira is not coming today. He has a conflict. But I have not heard from Michael.
So it looks like Brendan Moran will be coming specifically for the pact discussion.
That's good to hear. Hello, Rickard. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
Hello. And hello, Brandon.
Okay, maybe we have critical mass now.
Yeah, I think so. Do you want to go through the agenda or shall I?
Oh, go ahead. Why not?
Okay. We have two large, okay, it's changed. We have 3.5 fields of discussion planned for today. One being the tag 38, the extension to problem details that does the language direction. And the half discussion attached to that is that we might want to talk a bit about how we evolve tags in general. And on the topic of working group documents, there's a question of the status of file magic, and Carsten has a few updates on CBOR Pact. Originally, I would have arranged these things according to the slides that Carsten prepared. But Brandon, if you are only here for Pact, if you want, we can shuffle back so that we start with CBOR Pact. And I don't know if you're interested in the other topics.
Brandon said I can call him when we do Pact. So
okay, great. Any additions to that? Any changes that people want to make? Any things that we should consider before we head right into tag 38? Hearing
Brandon
none.
just said that he would be happy with us starting with Pact now.
Okay, yeah, then let's shuffle around and do it that way. And in this case, either way, floor is yours. I think you would be sharing slides. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so these slides talk about tag 38 first, but let me just move forward. Packed. So we just finished working with last call. We got a few responses. We got a lot of offline thingies coming up here and there. So I'm not even sure that the list that is on that slide is even complete. So I think the overall outcome is this can be done as it is, but there are still lots of ideas of maybe improving or changing it in one way or the other. So I would like to bring up some of these items. And some of them were really coming out of the blue. For instance, I think, Christian, it was you who asked about deterministic encoding and packed. And I must admit, I haven't really thought about that at all. It's not even clear whether we are talking about deterministic forms of packing or packing of deterministic encoding, both of which are interesting. The first one, deterministic packing, would be interesting because at the moment we don't specify the packer, we only specify the unpacker. So the having the packer produce something that is useful as a signing input would be a whole new thing to think about. But of course, that's something that any document that uses the packed scheme as a normative reference might be doing. Oh, Marco was it. Thank you. The other thing, packing deterministic, would be making sure that our unpacking algorithm actually leaves something behind that can again be used as a deterministic encoding. And I think we haven't really thought about that issue either. So I think some thinking and experimenting will be required to discuss this. And yeah, I would like to hear a little bit about what people are thinking we should be doing with this. Go ahead, Brendan.
So my take on this is that we should treat them separately. One of the points of packed CBOR is that it can be used in place. So unpacking it and expecting to have deterministic encoding doesn't make sense to me. I'd say that if you've signed something, then what you've signed is what you get. Trying to pack something post-signature makes no sense to me.
Well, you use deterministic encoding for many things, not just for signing things. But when you use it for signing, then typically you don't have the actual signing input as the transferred representation. You're building the signing input from some data that you have. So your database says this particular playbook entry was produced by John, and then you have a signature that verifies that. And to be able to create the signing input for the signature, you would want to use some form of deterministic packing.
Right, and I appreciate this, but what I'm trying to say is that that use case doesn't seem compatible with packed to me. There are use cases that are compatible with packed. This isn't one of them. So I think if you're trying to construct things in that way, packed CBOR is probably not for you. That, or there's got to be a fallback deterministic packing algorithm. One of the two.
Yeah, so far we have discussed packing with respect to generic packers, which are really hard to get deterministic. But if we have an application-specific format, such as, for instance, suit, we might have well-defined points where the packing mechanism comes in. So I even think it would be easier for these application-specific packed formats to be useful in a deterministic manner as well.
Okay, I think that that's going to be really difficult to accomplish, though.
Yeah, it depends on how much packing you actually want. If this is just a high-level thing that avoids your format having to define ways of avoiding gross redundancy, then it might be possible. But maybe
Yes, that makes sense.
actually don't have to solve it now. So that would be one outcome of the discussion, to say, yeah, this can be thought about, but please think about when you need it, because your application will shape what this is actually going to be. And it's hard to discuss this in a vacuum.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Good, but really, this really was an example for why you need working class codes, because it triggers some brain cells that weren't active, and it's good to know that, yeah, this is at least now something that we understand an application developer may want to do at some point. Next question, how do we handle sequences? Now, obviously, you can pack each element of the sequence. But that doesn't really allow you to use the full redundancy between the elements. So what we really would like to be able to do is pack a sequence. And how do you do that? Well, of course, you stash the sequence into an array, pack, and then unwrap. So that's easy, except that we don't know how to do this unwrap thing. And of course, if you come from the Lisp world, then of course you immediately invent something that would be called unwrapped splicing, which is a way to unwrap an array and put the elements of the array into the sequence where the unwrapped splicing data item was before. So if you look at this example here with element 1, the tag thing, tagged NNNN, and element 4. So this starts life as a 3-element sequence. And what the unwrapped splicing essentially does is when you process it, it expands into 2 more elements of the sequence. So it's not just an array, but the array that is in the square brackets. But it says when you're done creating this array, take it apart and put all the top level items in that array as separate elements of the sequence into the sequence. So this is certainly something that can be done. It's probably something that implementations that operate on sequences really need to expect, because it's not at all something that current implementations would expect. So this requires some processing, and maybe the first thing that is going to be an implementation issue is that the overall sequence, once you start reading it, has the wrong number of elements. So if you use this, for instance, in a place where you would distinguish different arrays by or different sequences by their size, you would look at the sequence before unpacking it, and it would have the wrong size. So for instance, in the example I made here, you would look at it and say, oh, it has 3 CBOR data items. And only when you actually look at the CBOR data item number 2, you see that it's unwrapped splicing. So again, the application would have to be very warned about that. But I think it can be done in cases where you still would want to use a sequence because it's usually the more efficient way of doing things. But if you actually want to put some packing in there, packing across elements of the sequence, this unwrapped splicing thing would do it. So that's something we could define in this document. That's something we could define later. So it's not really necessary to define this now. But I think we should think about whether we have use cases that would want to use redundancy across items in a sequence or elements in a sequence, and whether this particular solution already solves that problem. So, Richard, when you think about ad hoc, for instance, is that something that you could imagine using?
Sorry, could you repeat that? You were referring to me, or?
Yeah, I just wonder. I think your specifications are, or at least you are involved with specifications that use sequences, and I was trying to pick your brain here.
I think on the ad hoc point, I believe Marco is a better reference there because he's more actively working on that implementation we have. So I don't know if he has any feedback on that point.
Yeah, that depends on the exact sequence you build, maybe, and the amount and type of EAD items, probably.
Yeah.
If you go for plain ad hoc with no particular additions, probably you don't reach a critical mass to get benefit of this. So it really depends, but not to be excluded in general either.
Yeah, so this sounds a little bit like a lukewarm maybe. So the question really is, should we try to define this thing now? Or should we define packing first and then go ahead and maybe define this unwrapped splicing thing separately from that?
Well, my impression here is this would really work well independently of packing, and that will need a lot of use cases that we don't have yet.
Okay,
and so also maybe an impression of why are those users that use CBOR sequences, why are they using sequences, and can they just switch over to arrays in that case for applications like this?
Good. So it seems we have approximately the same resolution again. If somebody needs this, we know which slide to look at and can start working on this. So next item. So this is an example of a case that maps really well to what the pact does at the moment. So assuming that you want to do some string processing here, and you have 3 URIs that use HTTPS packed example. The S didn't vanish for a reason; it just vanished as a mistake. then you can extract the common prefix, HTTPS packed example, put it into the prefix table. And we even have a common suffix here, .html, which is only common to 2 of the 3, but still may worth extracting. And then you can apply the prefix to the result of applying the suffix to foo and to bar, and then just the prefix to end.cbor. So that works well. What we cannot do is kind of the inverse situation, where the things on the outside change and the inside is constant. So I've called this midfix here, which is different from circumfix, which is again different. So we have the domain name pack.example in all 3 entries of the array, all 3 elements of the array. And we extract the pack.example into the prefix table. And now we can do something with that prefix table, use prefix 0 to build the pack.example /foo.html, and again use that for bar.cbor and so on. Yeah, the example works well for the case where we only have a single concatenation. But if we need 2 concatenations, then we're kind of missing a construct. So we don't have a tag that would allow us to outright concatenate 2 strings or other things that can be concatenated. The concatenation is always combined in the current document with accessing the prefix table or the suffix table. So in this particular case, there is a cop-out. Of course, if you know that you want to do this, you can simply throw the strings that you need to concatenate into the prefix table, HTTPS and CoAP-S, and still build what you need. But that's not very useful for static dictionaries. So the use case where the midfix stuff is really missing is a use case where you would use static dictionaries. Yeah, so the status quo is we cannot do anything for this use case except by cheating, like in this case, which works fine for purpose-built dictionaries. Is this something that we want to look at? Okay, it seems nobody really cares about that specific example too much.
I care about the case, the general case behind this, not this particular style of composition. So if we, I think I've mentioned this in my mail today too. I like to have some extensibility on how things can be packed. This would be a good example, but I don't care so much about the particular case.
Yeah, in this case, simply having a tag that takes two strings and concatenates them would be all that's needed. So if you look at this from an extensibility angle, then it's easy to define a tag that solves this problem. But go ahead.
Which will also kind of in a tag that concatenates might also help with the last case about the expanding in the inside the sequence. So maybe that's a topic we can extract from this.
Mm-hmm. Brendan?
I think I was probably going to say something similar, but from a perspective of how this kind of thing could get used in Suit, I would expect that some of the arrays that Suit uses would have common patterns in them, and being able to inject those common patterns into the middle of an array would be very important. So that winds up being effectively a mid-fix compression. I think that Suit might conceivably make use of this. It's really hard to know without trying it out a bit more. But yeah, I think mid-fix, certainly it's not like top priority for packed CBOR, but I could see it being useful. And especially when combined with sequence unwrapping.
Okay, I will have another slide about extensibility and our strategy for doing extensibility here, but it seems to me this is again something that is best discussed in the context of a specific application. And if we have the extensibility in place to make use of this, then we can do it when we come to that application. Okay, I have one more comment about the FX packing. So FX packing is currently defined for string plus string, where the rump determines whether it's the result will be a text versus a byte string. So we already have a rule there that combines different types. We have array plus array, and we have map plus map. But we do not have array plus map, and we do not have string plus map or array plus number. These are all invalid, which is fine because we have defined error handling. But maybe there are some cases where it actually makes sense to, for instance, automatically widen a single data item to an array or things like that. So I think this would be a good time to think about that. In this case, we wouldn't be defining a new tag to enable this, but we would be extending the behavior of the existing prefix and suffix referencing tag. So that's a very different type, very different kind of extension we would make. So I think we cannot really completely cop out of that question. We have to decide we are going to do it now or we are not going to do it now, but it's hard to edit later.
Do you have examples of what an array plus map or map plus array might even do, or what, say, string
Yes.
plus?
So when you look at Chris Zipp's record type, then you immediately have about 10 ideas of how you could use splicing together arrays and maps. I haven't actually defined any one of these, but it would be possible. And when you're thinking about combining arrays and strings, you immediately think about Python join. So I think that there are a number of combinations that are possible here that actually make sense. Again, it would be nice to have the applications that really need that. Yeah, when we look at the CRI problem, there we have again a situation where we actually would like to combine things that are structurally not quite the same, but we haven't even started to understand what we want to do there. So I think it's very much conceivable that you want to do that, but it's not like that we have a single natural way for combining these things.
But that sounds a bit like it would be either implementation or at least type specific what happens there, and that sounds complicated to consider now.
Yep. Yeah, so the question really would be, can we do something now that would make it less of an issue if an application needs this?
I think you'll come back to this later. There is this point about possibly merging pre and postfix styles, and if we in some way generalize the pre and postfix, maybe that joining operation will not so much be a property of referencing into a prefix or postfix item, and then that this addition here would be described in pre and postfix terms. But if that composition becomes a property of the item inside the affix list, then that composition could be more flexible, and we would have a way for placing elements in that table that brings with it some composition rules, and then we get all that flexibility there and don't have to define it for prefixes and for postfixes as a binary operation. Maybe that helps.
Yeah, so the special behavior could be attached to the referencing tag, which is relatively expensive because you need to have a number of those referencing tags, and you have to have compact encoding for them to actually benefit from the packing. Or it could be attached to the table entries, which we have avoided so far because it means that the table entries need some additional data attached to them. Or what we have done is we have actually attached some of the semantics to the table. So these are approximately the three cases, the three places where we can do something. Yeah, let's come to that in a minute. Because before we do that, maybe we should discuss extension points in general. So it's pretty clear that we have an extension point where we define new table setup tags. And in particular, we expect to define a new table setup tag for every single static dictionary. So that would be the normal way to do a static dictionary, just define a tag for it. Of course, you could also do a static dictionary by referencing some data using a UI or hash and so on. But if it's actually static and standardized, like what was it, 3485 was, then you would just give it a tag and then it's there. So that's an obvious extension point. And we can define new reference tags. So we could define reference tags for midfix, circumfix, template expansion, and so on. But of course, if we have new reference tags, these either need to use the existing table, so that they would, in the current situation, use one of the three tables sharing prefix and suffix, or they would define the new table type, the new table types, and then we would have to explain how the table setup works. So that's pretty much the extension points that we have at the moment. And I think, Christian, that you wanted to bring up the ability to put something into the tables beyond just putting the data item itself there.
Yeah, yeah. So I think whether it's in the table or in the data item, in model-wise, doesn't matter so much. I would view it more in being inside the table entry, but it's how it's set up doesn't need to match one by one to how it's in the table. So for example, there could be a table setup that still says we have a list of prefix things and a list of suffix things, but that populates a single sequence of somehow typed entries in the table that, for example, then contains the first three items that are prefixes, and thus use string concatenation if there are strings and array concatenation if there are arrays, and some postfix entries. And then if there's different table setup or an additional entry to an additional type of, if the table is set up differently, then that could allow inserting elements into the table that have yet again different rules. That would then be any kind of the circum, mid, or other fix entries.
So how do we do this now? I mean, the question is how do we define the extension point in such a way that we can add this later in a way that doesn't sacrifice backwards compatibility. So, for instance, we could say that one of these tables actually is not a data item, but a functional. And so you apply the functional to the argument of to the content of the reference tag. So that would solve most of the problems. And we could even hijack one of the existing tables by saying the default situation, unless you do this and this, the functional is essentially created by doing the prefix or suffix operation. So that would be one way of doing it. So right now we cannot merge, we cannot prefix or suffix tags. So when you find a tag in one of the prefix or suffix tables, that could have a different meaning than other things. But that's maybe related to the next item. So one question was, do we really need to have a separate prefix table from a suffix table? And clearly having one less table means that you save a byte, because in the table setup tag, you no longer have to reserve an array for the prefix ones and reserve an array for the suffix ones. And it also makes it easier to actually use the same piece of text or the same piece of array in both the prefix and the suffix position. Right now, you essentially have to use one of the entries to refer to the other entry, concatenating it to the empty string, which does work, but it's kind of ugly. Of course, the next question is, why do we separate the sharing table from the affix table? And I think that there are stronger arguments why one would want to do that, because the sharing table is just pointer chasing, while the other one is processing of strings, arrays, and maps. So it's a very different kind of operation. But at least the question comes up. So given that we have two positives here, saves the bytes and makes it easier, the question is, wasn't there a downside? And of course there was a downside, because when you actually write down a reference tag and have exceeded the range of a particular length or size of reference tag, then you get into the next one. And the way we have structured these things, for prefix tags, we have this first group of 1 plus 31 or 32 references which are significantly more efficient. And for suffix tags, we actually only have 8 of them. So as soon as you get out of that area, you lose a byte, and that can make a difference with respect to packing efficiency.
Do I understand that right? That merging the tables here, when you say merging the tables here, you still mean using the one different telling which, whether it's a prefix or postfix, would still be done by the tag around
Yes.
the rump item and not by the table entry.
Right. The
Okay.
reason is that it's just very expensive to put that information into the table entry. Of course, we could invent less expensive ways of doing that, but yeah, these also require some processing then and so on. Yeah, of course, it would be much nicer to have a single range of referencing tags that says do whatever the table says, and the table then says I'm a prefix, I'm a suffix, I'm a functional, and then we have we don't need to spend another space of reference tags for the suffixes. But of course, the point was to use this for actually saving bytes in building that table.
But the current document already makes a statement that prefix is expected to be the more common case. So maybe prefix could be the default, and then there would be kind of one byte marking for postfixes, for example. So the most common case would still be cheap.
How to do that 1 byte marking?
It's a 2 byte marking probably, because we don't want to spend a low tag for that.
Yeah. And there go your Dodge HTMLs.
Yeah. But the .h, sorry, Brandon.
My take on this is that it probably makes more sense to save a bit of space for simple cases. And most of the time, I think this will save a lot of space and effort in simple cases. It also means that you can, I mean, I think you've made the argument here already that it's easy to share affixes, but I don't know. It would be really nice if we could get a quantification for actual applications on the impact that this has, but I don't think we have enough actual samples that for real applications that we can make a properly informed decision. So this is going to end up being finger in the air regardless of what we do, unless we do that. I guess what I'm saying is I'm making an argument that we should get more test cases so that we can actually have some data and do some real measurements on how this impacts the results.
If we merge the prefix and suffix tables, we could still get by without adding a couple of bytes to each suffix by actually keeping the suffix reference tags. I mean, this would be a little wart in the grand scheme of things, but it would be easy to share the same string as a prefix and suffix, and it would still keep the idea of open that if you put a tag in there, then that tag tells you what the actual functional is that is applied to the argument of the tag, of the referencing tag.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, honestly, you know, it costs a byte, or sorry, you save a byte, and sometimes it costs a byte for the size. But overall, I think it's a win to put them together, because anytime you share affixes, you gain any lost space right back.
And in the case of a functional, that functional would basically get a Boolean argument for free, whether it's in prefix or in postfix mode.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I could. Sounds good to me.
Okay. I think I'm getting a direction here. So I think this has to be written up. But I think I will be able to generate a pull request from that. And of course, I also want to change my implementation to implement that as well. That makes a lot of sense, I think. Okay, as always, tags are the one thing that make things possible in CBOR that are not possible in other environments. Great. So we have 14 minutes left. Let me quickly run through the last 3 slides here. There were some editorial comments, so I think we need terms like current table. We probably need to describe the overflow implementation scheme, because it's so much easier to think in terms of overflow than in terms of adjusting index numbers when building augmented tables. And somebody has to go ahead and write the pseudocode for an unpacker. So of course I could do that, but then it would be in Ruby again, and I don't know if people are happy with that. So maybe you can threaten to do it in Ruby, and then if nobody volunteers, that's what you get. Okay. Next item, interoperability. So I think we have 2 natural profiles right now. Some people will want to implement this for sharing only, because thank you, Brandon. There are cases where the sharing really brings the large benefits, and sharing has the advantage that the implementation can do this with simple pointer chasing, so you don't have to do any string processing and so on. So the sharing only profile of PACT will be perfect for very constrained devices. And the sharing plus FX situation is probably the other profile. Well, that's everything. But you could possibly split this into a strings only case and a full implementation that does arrays and maps too, because I think quite a bit fewer cases will really benefit from doing arrays and maps. But they are really useful for some cases, so I would like to keep them in. Yeah, so do we suggest these as profiles? That was the main question I had on this slide. And the other question was, do we maybe do specific tags, just as we have tag 51? By the way, I give that thing a new number in the next version, because 51 is actually the number 3. So that's not something we want to spend here. Anyway, so should we have separate tags for these profiles? Now that we are about to merge prefix and suffix, maybe the expense of having a single tag for both is no longer as big. yeah, I think we need to take that to the list because the time is running out. But if you have a quick reaction to that, that would be nice. And while you still think about that, the last thing is the draft currently still says informational. And I think we have agreed to make it standards track, and the data tracker already says that. And is that actually true? Sorry, some email said it says that. I didn't actually check that.
I changed the data tracker to say standards track, so you should change the header to match.
Yeah, okay. So we don't have to run this discussion again. Anything
Right.
else unpacked?
Just the quick thing of Chris Zip's thing of the record tags for records. That's if that's done, that's going to a separate document. So there's nothing in here for that, right?
Right, that would be a standard specification that you put in for specification required,
Yes.
even if he actually doesn't use any specification required tags anymore.
Okay.
And of course, we could think about how the new idea of putting functionals into the tables could relate to what he's doing. So there's a little bit of new thinking that may be coming out of this meeting.
Right. But no
I think
change to pact as a result.
right.
Okay, good.
So let's use the last 8 minutes to quickly talk about tag 38, which is being defined in the core problem details document. So we are not concerned with the whole problem statement thing, but we are concerned with the change to the tag 38. Just as a reminder, this slide, so if you want to say something like shalom, then you have to change the writing direction. And there is a common view in the internationalization community that this is best done by a separate argument, separate from the language tag itself, because a language tag doesn't really tell you which writing system you are actually using. And you can read the references down here. And we have a proposal in the core draft that defines this. The one thing that came up in the last minute was whether we maybe need a third value for the direction, which is called auto in the W3C document. So left to right and right to left are the ones that are really going to be used in the end. But there is also an auto case. And of course, you could say you get this if you don't put in this optional element. But if this is used to override something that is inherited from the context, you may want to reset the context back to the default. So that's why it may be a good idea to have a third alternative there. And more generally, that opens the question, do we want to have some extensibility there? So if we nail this down to those 2 or 3 values, what do we do next week when we find out that the direction is needs more cases? And that maybe leads into the agenda item that we may not have time for anymore, which is how do we even evolve tags? So this is the first time we actually are changing the domain of a tag. So the meaning of tags changes all the time because the data that go in there are subject to various registries and so on. But here we are actually changing the structure of the content of that tag. And so far we have avoided that. Yeah, Christian, one tends to think that until one goes into a room where internationalization experts sit. and you get out of the room with a really big headache and understanding why
Yeah.
you want to provide these actual
Yeah.
explicit base directions.
I think I read one of the documents about this, and I think they said that there's an explicit list of languages where it's recommended not to state it, even that when it's right to left. But there are languages where it should be explicitly stated because it's necessary. But that's all in the details of the languages.
So the problem is that the Unicode characters that are in that string do not necessarily all have strong directionality. And as soon as you have characters with weak directionality in there, you need the context, how to start setting up the bidirectionality engine. And I invite you to go into that IETF thread where people are pulling out old documents they have written 15 years ago that show you really have to put this there, and they lament that they are not, that BCP 47 did not make this explicit, but this is kind of oral tradition at the moment, and they have to fix that.
Yeah. Either way, that's the domain discussion that we don't have to have here.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to use 3 minutes here to bring up completely different approaches. So we could do this as it's defined in the current draft. We could wait for BCP 47 to grow something that can indicate the direction in the language tag. Now that is unfortunately recommended against by W3C. And also, given the pace in which internationalization discussions are resolved, we are probably not going to get the outcome of that this decade.
Yes, I second that advice.
Okay, so people don't like it, at least some people don't like it, and even if we like it, it would take too long. So another way to solve this would be to separate out separate tags for direction only, leaving tag 38 unchanged and wrapping the tag 38 by another tag that does this space direction setting. That, of course, would be a clean solution, except that the internationalization people tell me these really should be coming together. It should not be separated out. So yeah, but that would be an alternative that would make it unnecessary to change tag 38, but it would keep a tag 38 there that is essentially much less usable without the explicit direction information attached to it. And then, of course, we could just define as many tag 38 analogs as we have directions. So the thing we are doing in many other places as well, that we encode some of the information into the tag number. That is certainly an alternative that we should think about. But looking at all this, I'm still happy with what we have in the document, but I wanted to hear whether people have a strong preference here.
A point I'd like to make for the one we have in the document now is that it's easy for implementations that basically discard language and or directionality information because they can't process it. Because these will just see it's tag 38, I take element number 1 in the array and use that and discard everything else. And if we get 2 or 3 or an extensible number of tags, that's just a list of tags to basically to ignore and pick this or that element from the tag for those implementations.
Yeah, it's the second element, but yes.
Starts at 0.
Good. I'm done with my slides.
And we are quite approaching the end of the time that was allocated. We didn't really get to the point of file magic. I'll just take this as as being poked as the shepherd to see where this is stuck. Any further feedback on the tags on the patent 38 and evolvability would be much appreciated on list. Otherwise, we can still pick these topics up next week as well, in 2 weeks as well. So with that, thanks everybody. Thank you, Marco, for helping with the Barry?
No, just agreeing that, and thanks, Marco, as always, for taking notes. Appreciate that.
Okay, thanks everyone. See you around.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.